sort of a little bit about our program, and then specifically I'll be addressing the EDRR program and how that works, and some challenges and successes, and then sort of future directions for our program. Let's see, I just clicked it forward,
Julie, I don't
Steve,
think
and I don't see the presentation clicking.
I don't think you're on your presentation. I think you're actually, maybe go down into PowerPoint on your, there you go. I'll give that a try. Just start this.
Okay, there we go.
Thanks.
Okay. So for those of you who don't know our program or our organization, we're a nonprofit, the Pacific Northwest Invasive Plant Council, and we're part of a larger group, the National Association Exotic Plant Pest Control. And there are state chapters, and sort of, you can see from the map here, look at California, Texas, Oklahoma, they have their state chapters, and then us, for example, we're up in the Pacific Northwest, and our coverage is Washington and Oregon. Pacific Northwest includes a much greater region, but that's the region that we cover currently. And the programs, the active programs we're really focusing on right now, the first one I'm going to talk to you about today is the EDRR Citizen Science Program, where we're training citizen science to survey for invasive species, identify them, and report those to us. Then we report those sightings to land managers. And the second big thing we're working on is a nursery certificate program, where we're trying to obtain funding right now to work with nurseries to certify them as invasive-free. As we all know, over 80% of our non-indigenous invasive species come through the horticultural trade. So this is an exciting program we're working on now. And we're continually working with education, information exchange, offering workshops, conferences, and so forth. Education is a very big part of what we do. The goals of this program, our program approach, really what we're doing is we're training citizen scientists to identify a certain suite of invasive species and locate these populations and pass that information along to the local, state, and federal land managers that are actually responsible for removing and controlling those species. Our goals are to decrease any newly established invaders in Washington State, and really help the agencies that are out there and help them reduce cost and resources spent on their programs, using our volunteer base to sort of do the early effort of finding a species. Potentially could save lots of resources for the local, state, and federal agencies that are already sort of prioritizing and strapped for funding in several ways. And then our overarching goal is to decrease threats, biodiversity in general in the Pacific Northwest. For 2012, we had our pilot survey area was 8 Washington counties, and the counties were based on cooperative weed management areas. So in the bottom corner here, you can see the Chehalis River Cooperative Weed Management Area in Nisqually, Highway 12, and the South Central Washington. And these weed cooperative management areas are they're land managers, they're private citizens, they're a group of people that are interested in controlling invasive species in a discrete area, and that they may have similar issues with similar plants. They get together and share information on eradication and sort of where the distributions are in their counties as a way to help each other out. And early working with Greg Holbrick from the WDSA, we tried to target areas that didn't have as much support as maybe other counties. So we're starting with these 8 counties. We started with these 8 counties in 2012, and this year we've expanded to 3 more counties, Jefferson, Clallam, and then also Skamania. And so our hope is to eventually, expand it even beyond the borders of Washington, to move into Canada and also neighboring states within the U.S. So that's the scope of our area, fairly large scope, and when we started discussing about, what species should we focus on in these, what species should we, what are the highest priority species within these areas to train volunteers to identify, and this was no small task. From the previous map, you can see it's a very, very large scope, and as we all know, an early detection rapid response species, these are species that are in low abundance in places and are not quite as, as widespread in Washington State. Scotch broom is an incredible problem and widespread, so that species does not qualify as an EDRR. We're sort of, in this program, we're focusing on the early detection rapid response species that may be in low abundance or non-existent in places. The idea is to track them so they don't become a problem like Scotch broom and other species. And there was a lot of input from from the board members, from WSDA, all the county weed coordinators in our area through the 11 counties. The Washington Invasive Plant Council was involved, and the State Noxious Weed Board. Botanists were also involved, as well as many of the state national park botanists and invasive species biologists. So we consulted a large group of people, and we came down, we narrowed the list to 30 different species, which you see here. So here's the South Central Washington CWMA, the Highway 12, Chehalis River, and Nisqually. And this is the class of noxious weed in Washington State. A's and B's, and a few of them are we listed on the monitor list. For example, English holly in Washington State, we're seeing this species escape into natural areas more and more, and it's cropping up in, on the outskirts of national parks, in forest, lots of areas of Forest Service land. So this is a species we put on the list as well as arundo and pampas grass to sort of find out more about the distribution in Washington State. So this is the list that we considered, and there are many species that didn't make it on the list, and I'll talk a little bit about how we deal with those species in the next couple slides. But we felt like all the land managers and agency people we discussed, this final list, everybody agreed that it was a great starting point. And this is the list we used for 2012 and 2013. In the next few slides, I just want to give you an idea of what happens, what goes on in the trainings, and how we prepare and equip volunteers to go out and conduct surveys in the field. Species identification is the largest emphasis. So the workshop trainings, both in the classroom and the field, we use PowerPoint slides, herbarium specimens, live plant material when we can get it. And there's a big focus on species verification. So once the volunteers are trained on the species and how to identify them, there's a big emphasis placed on how they go about with the verification process. So volunteers either need to take a photo of the species and send it to us, they need to take a specimen and send it in to us, or they can do a more formal collection and collect a voucher specimen. And the collecting of voucher specimens isn't a requirement, and at the end of the trainings we offer this to people. I bring plant presses, and I go through an additional training for people who are interested in learning how to collect voucher specimens. And then there's the reporting the surveys, how to conduct a survey and what kind of information to collect. They also get a training booklet. So this is from 2012. The booklet from 2013 was similar. So in the booklet, we have the list of aquatic, wetland emergence, and terrestrial plants from each of the 4 CWMAs that we focused on. And then this is an example just looking at clematis. It gives you the class what class it is, and then where would you find it, the physical characteristics of it, and if it's a species that has lookalikes, we'll have a page that has lookalikes of this plant can be confused with. So volunteers are equipped with the species identification book after they leave the course, as well as the survey form. Those are the two most important pieces that volunteers take out into the field with them, the survey form and the booklet I just showed you. And this is an example of the survey form, and we adapted this from King County's Noxious Weed Watcher program, which is a well-established program in King County, and Sasha Shah has been leading that program for quite some time, and she shared her resources with us. We adapted it for our purposes, but essentially it's the same information, where you're at, which county, and descriptive characteristics of the area they surveyed, and if in fact they find an EDRR species, they record the information here at the bottom. And we try to also emphasize with volunteers that conducting a survey, a negative detection, they go out to a place and they didn't find anything on the list, that's just as valuable as a survey form that's turned in that has a location of an actual EDRR species. We take the survey forms and distribute them to the land managers, and they're just as interested in trails that have been surveyed where EDRR species or invasive species have not been found. Then they don't have to spend the resources sending their botanists out to survey that area. And once the survey data, so how do we use the data? Once they fill it out, they send the information to us, and the very first thing is we identify, so there's the verification period, and up here is just a couple images of some pictures that a volunteer, Ruth Bates, sent in last year. This is Senecio, this is tansy ragwort, and so she's taken a couple of photos, enough photos for us to give it to positively ID it, and then I will write up the report, and the report is sent to the County Noxious Weed Board, the county where it was found. I put the information on EDD maps, and EDD maps, for those of you who aren't familiar, this is an early detection and distribution mapping system that Washington uses. And so, for example, if I go ahead and put for using Ruth's survey as an example, I'll put Ruth's sighting of Senecio on the maps. This one was found in Mount Rainier National Park, and that information will, Greg Hulbrick at the Washington State Department of Agriculture will get an instantaneous email on his iPhone that says, here's this species that it's been found in this spot. So then it goes to Greg at WSDA. We pass it on to the folks at the Washington Invasive Species Council and the State Noxious Weed Board, and if they have actually, if the volunteer has collected a voucher specimen, in this case Ruth did collect a voucher specimen of the tansy ragwort, we send the specimens to the Otis Douglas Hyde herbarium, which is where the state noxious weed, the state noxious weed collection is kept, and a second herbarium sheet is sent to the WTU herbaria, Washington Territory herbaria, which is on upper campus here at University of Washington. And then there is monitoring and the outcome reporting, where we send a general report to all the agencies, and then there's follow-up the next season to identify if in fact the plant was controlled for, and figuring out if in fact the information was useful to the land manager and so forth, so we can fine-tune our methods for the following season. During the trainings, we give volunteers, like I was mentioning, a PowerPoint of the general characteristics of species identification, pointing out the diagnostic characters, and we also talk about the distribution of species. These distribution maps are from 2011, and WSDA is in the process of updating these for 2013 currently. And this gives volunteers an idea of how many acres the plant is currently infesting and where the distribution is. And then, as mentioned before, if there's something that the species is very closely, that could be mistaken for, we give training on the lookalikes, the non-native lookalikes. And in this case, common cupina can be mistaken for many of the knapweeds, the noxious weed knapweeds that are found in Washington State. And this is just to show you an example of the WTU, another sort of reporting map where the information would go. So if they collected a voucher specimen, then the distribution would also be known globally on the herbarium. So there's global access to where this plant is occurring. In 2012, we gave volunteers maps of potential areas they could search for invasive species. This example is just from the Nisqually CWMA, so we had a larger map of showing where the CWMA in this case covers 3 counties, and then it gives volunteers an idea of the national park, the U.S. Forest Service, DNR land. So it gives volunteers an idea of where they can conduct surveys. And then as the map, the county maps, we provided county maps as well, showing them places where surveys could be conducted. And I will say in 2012, we had a very late start in this program, and so our survey assignments were very general. We were just telling volunteers they could go out anywhere on public land to conduct surveys. And at the very end of that survey reporting period, we actually had some collaborations with the Forest Service where they provided us maps of specific trails. And what we found was that that was really important for motivating volunteers to get out and participate in the program. So some of the major successes we had, we were able to coordinate in 2012. We were able to coordinate with over 30 weed managers from 8 agencies covering 8 Washington counties. We conducted 5 trainings in both eastern and western Washington. You might remember from the distribution map that we covered both sides of Washington State, east and the west, and so we made sure to conduct trainings in both of those areas. In total, 93 volunteers were trained to identify these 30 target EDRR species. I will say that of the 93, 56 signed up to participate. So after the trainings, there were a certain amount of people that were really motivated to conduct the surveys. But what we found is there was quite a few people who were just coming to the trainings because they were really interested in being educated about invasive species. In many cases, they were private landowners that wanted to figure out, what they should be looking for on their own land and what they could do to report it or control the species. This is one of our main missions for our nonprofit is education. So we found this as a huge success. Is not only were we educating and training volunteers to participate in the program, but those who couldn't volunteer or didn't want to participate, we were still educating people on invasive species and control methods. In total for 2012, there were 59 surveys conducted, and 20 of those surveys were actually effective at detecting EDRR populations. Our volunteers covered over 247 acres, lots of miles traveled, and lots of hours put in for volunteers for 2012. The main plants that they found were these 3 you see down here: English holly, tansy ragwort, yellow archangel. You might remember English holly is on the monitor list, so this was actually very good information for passing along to the State Noxious Weed and the County Noxious Weed Board, showing the expansion of the species into new areas. And tansy ragwort and yellow archangel, these were actually 2 of our species that were on the EDRR list that we would actually not consider true EDRRs, because in certain counties they are incredibly widespread and big problems. When we created the list, we had to sort of throw in a couple species that we called confidence builders for volunteers, because we didn't want to just have species on there that were in very low abundance, and they wouldn't likely find them. So we wanted to put a couple species on there that would make them feel like they're finding something. And in fact, they did find quite a few populations of tansy ragwort and yellow perk angel, which was still still valuable to the Forest Service people who knew the information we passed it along to. So the success, as I mentioned, came sort of at the end of the season in 2012 when we were able to get actual maps from the Olympic National Park, folks, and these were areas where we could send the volunteers and say, oh, Sleepy Hollow Trail, there's a great need to survey that area, or Silver Lake Trail. And volunteers, I think, felt some sort of, they were able to feel a little bit more ownership and a lot more interest in participating in the program when they could see that, oh, there's this specific trail that the Forest Service hasn't been able to get to, and they really need help with this. So that helped in getting people out. And so for 2013, we really concentrated on creating more specific survey assignments. We kept with our general survey assignments for people who you know, just wanted to go out and survey wherever they happen to be recreating. So we had a policy of you could connect survey on any public land, but again, we really tried to develop relationships with management agencies that needed help. And this year in 2013, we made a considerable effort to work more closely with the U.S. Forest Service, the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, specifically focusing on their wildlife areas, and the Department of Natural Resources looking at the natural area preserves and the natural resource conservation areas. This year in Gifford-Pinchot, so if you go to our website, volunteers have access to the specific locations. In Gifford-Pinchot, we were focusing on 4 different wilderness areas. And if you go on our website, and this is a spreadsheet we send out to volunteers where they can actually sign up, the trail name, the trail number, the county, and then they sign up. And once they've conducted the survey, I'll go back and let volunteers know that this trail has been surveyed so they can pick another assignment. Some major challenges we had, I mentioned the late start that we had in 2012, and it really takes time to coordinate with county, state, and federal agencies about where their priorities are, where they would like volunteers sent to. So that was a big challenge in 2012. 2013, we made a considerable effort to start much earlier, and like I said, we've outreach to the Forest Service, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and DNR, so we've gotten those relationships set up early. In 2012 and also this year, the large scope of these areas is challenging. So, for example, I talked about early detection rapid response species. What is it? It's a species that's in low abundance in areas, but it could be very prevalent in other areas. So in the South Central Washington CWMA, we have star thistle listed, and in the northern range of that CWMA in Kittitas and Yakima County, that species is in low abundance. But in Klickitat County, yellow star thistle would not be considered an EDRR species and is in large abundance. So working with EDRR species, it can be a little bit tricky when you increase your scope, because in some areas it might be a true EDRR and others not. And this is just something that you need to educate the volunteers on as you're going through the program, so they understand. If they conduct a survey in Klickitat County and they found yellow star thistle, and they go back out to that same area and it's still there the second year, it might still be there because in Klickitat County it's everywhere, and they're really trying to put an effort into it, but it's the eradication process is a lot slower than, if yellow star thistle was found in Kittitas County, the noxious weed people would be out there the next day to remove it. So educating volunteers on this is an important part of it. We only had 16 volunteers out of we trained 93, 56 of those actually signed volunteer agreements to participate in the program, but only 16 of those actually participated. Now those 16 did conduct over 50 surveys, so that was a success, but this year we're already seeing that what makes a difference is having these specific survey assignments for people to feel a little bit more like there's ownership over the trails and greater interest because they know that, for example, the Forest Service really needs this trail surveyed. And that leads to my next point of how to engage and motivate volunteers. And that's really the key that we found last year was providing these specific training assignments, survey assignments. And our future directions and goals for the program continue to work with the county, state, and federal agencies, refining the list, and to help them use our volunteer base to identify new populations of invaders at local scale so they can move to eradicate them. Identify specific areas for volunteers prior to survey season, so really make a great effort in the winter months to start collaborating with agencies to identify areas that are in great need of surveying. And also to consider how to examine how we can partner and or not duplicate efforts. So for example, I mentioned that King County Weed Watchers already has a really strong program, and they're collaborating with the Mountaineers this year to do a similar program to ours, but they're focusing on different areas. So the Mountaineers and King County and I are in close contact, so we're not sending volunteers into similar areas. And ways we're finding out we can partner, so an example of that would be the Department of Natural Resources this year. Our volunteer group is now merging with their volunteer group to conduct surveys. So linking volunteer groups together to give people an idea of really what the opportunities are for participating in volunteers in survey searches. And in the case of Department of Natural Resources, they have some really interesting surveys where you have to have a kayak or you have to have a boat, and you get to go to places on the Chehalis River where the general public usually can't access. So we can provide some really unique opportunities for volunteers to participate in surveying invasive species. We're really working on developing web-based survey reporting, and also a way that volunteers can go to our website and search for survey assignments that's a little more efficient than the way we're doing it now, which essentially I'm keeping track of the list and I update the list on the website, but we would like something that's more real time so volunteers can get information more readily. And our trainings were 2.5 hours, and in 2012 we offered an additional hour field training course, but we would like to offer even more intensive trainings, perhaps an all-day training where maybe the first part of the training is using PowerPoints and in the classroom setting, and then the second half we actually go out to a site where there's invasive species and conduct a survey with volunteers. Because another challenge we discovered this year was that the 2.5-hour training just simply was not good enough to build the confidence for a volunteer who had absolutely no botany background. And these are, I think, the people that were, at the edges that we were sort of losing and didn't participate because I think they felt a little overwhelmed with the list. And so trying to think about ways that we can build confidence and better equip volunteers to go out there and conduct surveys is definitely a next step for us. So that's sort of the program in a nutshell, and I'm happy to take questions at this point, and thank you for listening in.
Thanks, Julie. I'm going to unmute everyone so that if there are any questions you can ask. But I ask you, if you're on your end, if you could go ahead and hit the mute button if you don't have anything to ask. That way it kind of reduces the background noise. So looks like anyone that has a speaker should be unmuted at this point. Well, if nobody has any questions, you certainly have Julie's. I'll leave her slide up there. Julie, if you'll just leave that up for now. You can send her an email or give a phone call, and we can answer any questions directly for you.
Yeah, and I'm Steve. Can the group hear me? Am I still on?
Yes.
Also, if any of you have direct contact with with volunteer programs like this, it'd also be really helpful for me as we're developing this program to know sort of what is working for the volunteer programs you've worked with, or even from an agency standpoint of view, what would be helpful to you. How could a program like this help your efforts to locate and control invasive species? That would also be really helpful for us as our program develops.
I'll also say, well, hold on a second. Looks like I might have one question here. Okay, so looks like one person asked Julie, they're wondering what the initial process of getting the volunteers to sign up was.
Oh, so yes, so really getting the word out about the trainings, and the word out was an effort. It went out on our listserv, which went out on the Washington Native Plant Society, the DNR. So lots and lots of listservs I contacted, either if it was a state, federal, or even other nonprofit groups. I had a flyer that gave information about the program and the trainings, and so there was a lot of phone calls made on my part early on to sort of contact the people who had access to listservs. People posted on their websites. So really there was a lot of different avenues of how to get the word out initially.
Yeah, I know that.
And then people would contact me and sign up for the course if they were interested.
Okay, well, I encourage everyone to check back to invasiveplantcontrol.com, look at the IPC outreach side. We're going to be doing we have a lot of neat collaborative free webinars in the works for the rest of the year. It's kind of a slow season now for them, but starting again next month and into the fall, we're working with Pacific Northwest Invasive Plant Council, trying to do at least one per month for that region and that group. Working with Mid-Atlantic Invasive Plant Council, the Natural Areas Association, and others, doing collaborative efforts so that we can bring more information through this webinar venue so it's easier for people to access and get to meetings when I know it's more difficult to travel nowadays. So please pay attention to those things. I want to thank everyone for attending today, and please give Julie a call or an email if you have any more questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julie.
Thanks, Steve.